Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I was just wondering if after speaking to the public participation, that I could also just make my contribution.
You have 15 minutes within which you have to speak to all those.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll try. Mr. Speaker, earlier on in the morning, I had tabled before the House. I am, is it vertically challenged?
You are loud enough. Go
on. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was indicating that earlier in the morning I had presented a report of a public participation on the proposed removal from office by impeachment of His Excellency Rigathi Gachagua, EGH, the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya. Honorable Speaker, this is following the notice of a special motion by Honorable Mwengi Mutuse and in line with Article 1182 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, consequently, the House Business Committee approved a public participation program across all 290 constituencies, and I present on behalf of the House Business Committee. Mr. Speaker, I'll speak to the issue of the legal framework of public participation. And Mr. Speaker, Article 10.2 of the Constitution provides for the participation of the people as one of the national values and principles of governance. Mr. Speaker, Article 118 of the Constitution requires Parliament to ensure public access and participation of the people in its affairs. I will not go to the details, and we can read it for ourselves because of time. Mr. Speaker, I wish to note on my own behalf that in quasi-judicial proceedings like this, public participation is not really necessary, even though the courts are pronounced that they are. In my view, they are not actually necessary in quasi-judicial processes like this, because, Mr. Speaker, it's almost like saying that the judiciary needs public participation in making their decision. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I also want to speak to the issue of timelines. And, Mr. Speaker, Parliament has spoken very clearly on the issue of timelines, understanding Order 64.2. And in summary, Mr. Speaker, I would want to say, if you read the standing order, that there are very strict timelines for a process or a motion like this. And, Mr. Speaker, in setting the period, the National Assembly was guided by the need to preserve the overarching constitutional principle of acting without unreasonable delay. The special motion for removal from office by impeachment of the Deputy President was therefore processed in accordance with the timeline set out under Standing Order 64. Mr. Speaker, in buttressing the necessity for expedited consideration of special motions, previous speakers of the National Assembly of Kenya expressed themselves on the question of timelines for considering special motions by the House when the special motions were filed proposing the removal by impeachment of the then Cabinet Secretaries, Honorable Anne Waiguru, Honorable James Macharia, Honorable Kaimenyi, and more recently, Honorable Mithika Linturi. In all the foregoing instances, the Speaker emphasized the need to dispose of a special motion as soon as is practicable to remove the anxiety of hangman's noose from the neck of a state officer proposed for impeachment. Mr. Speaker, you have seen the level of anxiety that the Deputy President has undergone, and indeed when he was actually giving the press statement yesterday, he was almost in tears. And that is why the House hastens the process so that the emotional turmoil is lessened having gone through this process, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Clerk of the National Assembly published advertisements on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of October and invited written submissions via hand delivery, post, or email until the 5th of October 2024. Mr. Speaker, all these were also advertised on the 4th of October and extended to the 5th in each constituency. To assist in this exercise, a public view template was made available to the public in both English and Kiswahili to guide submissions. On the 3rd and 4th of October 2024, 40,000 copies of the public view templates were also circulated as newspaper pullouts. This template was designated to provide clarity and precision in responses, whether for or against a motion. Number 2, to supplement other means of public input. And 3, to ensure both qualitative and quantitative feedback was captured, which is actually as has been directed by the courts in the past. Mr. Speaker, I just want to indicate that many means were used, including radio, TVs, and other means to publicize this process, including Twitter, or formerly, currently X, or formerly Twitter, and Facebook pages. Mr. Speaker, the public was invited to submit views either in support or in opposition of the special motion or offer other views. Mr. Speaker, I wish to laud Kenyans for their growing consciousness on their civic rights and duties. Mr. Speaker, people participated in various ways, as was witnessed both on electronic and social media, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, many Kenyans who are participated very expressively. Mr. Speaker, I think many of us saw people expressing their views in many ways, some of which I will explain later. However, Mr. Speaker, by the nature of newsmaking, we saw the areas where the views were expressive, but much less in the areas where the views were not that expressive. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the report, and I want to download the parliamentary team, they have even captured photos of members of the public giving their views in constituencies very peacefully. But Mr. Speaker, as I want to repeat, that by the very nature of newsmaking, what we will see are the dramatic scenes. And those we saw, I don't think it is shame as such, it's their right and they can share. Mr. Speaker, I wish to indicate I wish to report that based on all that, over 200,000 responses were received, of which 65.1% supported the motion, while 33.81% opposed the motion, and 1.09% offered neutral or other alternative views. Mr. Speaker, some of the members in contributing have actually alluded to some of those alternative views. I've heard the speaker right before me talking about the issue that Kenya has very many pressing issues. Mr. Speaker, indeed it is true, Kenya has many pressing issues, and as a House, we are already seized of those issues and are indeed already dealing with some of those issues. One of those issues that the Parliament has raised is the issue of education, the education system, and we have called the CS for Education more than 2 times to deal with that issue. Again, on the health issue, we have also invited the CS for Health amongst other officials. So indeed, the House can chew and walk at the same time. Mr. Speaker, when a motion is brought of this magnitude, Parliament, by its own standing orders, must stop everything else and give priority to this motion. And that is why Parliament stopped all its business on Thursday and focused on this, and all members of Parliament went to their constituencies to deal with this issue. Mr. Speaker, I wish to indicate that given that this is a very special public participation process, a first of its kind, Mr. Speaker, since the Constitution was promulgated, there were some challenges, but which did not affect the overall product of public participation. Mr. Speaker, Some of those challenges were as follows. Mr. Speaker, there was political interference at public forums such as Bomas of Kenya and Murang'a. Mr. Speaker, there was violent disruptions in areas like Olkalau, Kipipiri, and Nyeri Town. Mr. Speaker, there was incomplete or unclear submission, including forms without identifying information or contradictory responses. Mr. Speaker, there was low turnout in some constituencies due to insecurity, such as in Bura. Mr. Speaker, public expectation for monetary compensation for participation was also experienced. Mr. Speaker, there was late submission of forms and memorandum in some instances. There were threats of violence towards officers and inappropriate language in some email submissions. And Mr. Speaker, there was pressure from some constituencies such as Olkalau and Kipipiri for officers to declare results prematurely. On the whole, Mr. Speaker, most places in the country went on uninterrupted. And the results that I just indicated to you, Mr. Speaker, are based on that. Mr. Speaker, because of time, and I would like other members to speak, I would want to invite members to look at the report that has been tabled by the House Business Committee. Mr. Speaker, I'll just speak very briefly on my own account. Mr. Speaker, I wish to indicate on my own account as a member of Suba North constituency that what we are going through post-2010 constitution, I want to agree with the honorable member that has spoken and said that it's a very important process because indeed it is. Mr. Speaker, it is a defining moment constitutionally and a first of its kind since 2010. It is both a legal and a political process. Mr. Speaker, the Supreme Court in the Sonko's case confirmed that impeachment is not just about civil liability or criminal culpability, but it's about accountability, political governance, as well as policy and political responsibility. Mr. Speaker, I'll speak very briefly to that in the end, but I want to speak to the issue of grounds. I'll be very brief, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are 3 grounds that have been given under Article 150 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak to the issue, the 3rd ground, which is gross misconduct. Mr. Speaker, I have actually looked at the Constitution and there is no definition of gross misconduct. I have looked at our laws and there is no definition of gross misconduct. Mr. Speaker, Black's Law Dictionary defines gross misconduct as a dereliction of duty, unlawful or improper behavior. Mr. Speaker, on that account alone, virtually every ground that has been stipulated here would amount to gross misconduct. Mr. Speaker, speaking as a governance expert, perhaps it's one of the areas we may want to change in future in the Constitution. Because I was saddened when Nancy Baraza was removed from office for just touching somebody's nose. Only. Even pinching. Yeah? Touching somebody's nose. So, Mr. Speaker, what I would like to say, Mr. Speaker, is based on these grounds, it is easy to impeach. Mr. Speaker, if you just had me 1 minute, please. Mr. Speaker.
Okay, you have 1.5.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would just want to say that I've been by nature, I know I'm a very tough person, but by very nature, I'm also very empathetic. And I've been sympathizing a lot with the Deputy Speaker, especially, Deputy President, sorry, especially when he prays, because I'm also a prayerful person. But Mr. Speaker, I would want the Deputy Speaker to learn from this.
Deputy President.
Sorry, Deputy President. Sorry, I don't know why I keep going to Honorable Gladys. Mr. Speaker, In my book, which I've just released, Rig or Be Rigged, Principle 9, the power of words, taming the tongue. Mr. Speaker, if the deputy president had been quiet, he would have carried many people in this house. But he did not tame the tongue. And every time he spoke, he's just showing further and further division of the country. And I feel sad as a country that many people, even my friends, because I have many friends in central Kenya, who are calling me, are not calling me from a governance perspective. They are telling me, please save us Mount Kenya. Mr. Speaker, when will we ever reach a point as a country when we look at governance issues and not ethnic parochial issues that have divided the country for a long time, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I do empathize with the deputy president, and I wish the hand he extended to the president, he had done it much earlier. Mr. Speaker, I hope he learns from the experience of Coriolanus of ancient Rome, who had won many battles, and his fame preceded him. But when he got in politics, his mouth brought him down. Mr. Speaker, I support.